Hey, Monique,
Hey.
I've got a question, a loaded question.
Good.
Have you ever been triggered?
Oh, is that a joke?
Kind of had a feeling this
Yes.
might resonate.
Yes.
But on today's podcast, we're going to build on a previous conversation we had about spaciousness and emotional reactions in
Huh.
conversation that could come from triggers. And
Huh.
so we're going to explore a little bit the world of what is a trigger. What does it mean to be triggered? And I think it's gonna be a fun one.
Yes.
Let's go. Welcome to Heart and Soul, the podcast where we empower and inspire women to lead their best lives, harnessing the power of their hearts and souls. We are Mariah
And Monique.
your hosts and guides on this journey of self-discovery and personal growth.
In each episode, we will dive deep into topics that matter most to you, from self-love and confidence to career development, relationships, and everything in between. We believe that every woman has a unique strength and inner wisdom waiting to be unleashed.
Join us as we cover insightful heart and soul-centered topics and interview incredible women who've overcome challenges, chased their dreams, and found their true purpose. Through all of this, you will discover practical tips, strategies, and real-life stories to help you navigate life's twists and turns.
For whatever season of life you're in, this podcast is your safe space to explore, learn, grow, and possibly even laugh and cry with us. So grab your headphones, maybe your favorite drink, and we'll embark on this transformative journey together.
With heart, I'm Mariah.
And with soul, I'm Monique.
Okay, so in a previous episode, we talked about the Buddhist concept of spaciousness
Yes.
and the sort of ability to work through in your mind and create spaciousness in an interaction or in a conversation that might help you sort of better react through that process.
Sure.
And in a couple of times during that conversation, we kind of walked around or circled around the idea of like something eliciting or causing some sort of an emotional reaction,
Mm-hmm.
which at the end of the day, a great word is trigger.
Yes.
And I think it's becoming more and more a word used to explain like why something blows up, like why a
Mm-hmm.
particular
Yes.
topic or a circumstance takes you to a different level, right?
Yes. Yes.
And an emotional trigger. So I wanted to kind of read a definition of an emotional trigger
Okay, good.
and then talk a little bit about where they come from because they're very individual. We all have our unique
Mm-hmm.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
and that experience lends itself to the very specific things that can just
Yeah, you can say
send us over
something
the
to two
edge.
different people and one's set off and one's like, oh, okay. They don't even care.
And when I put this into good old the Google,
The googs.
I'm really grateful for the AI overview because it completely summarized what I was wanting to share. But emotional triggers are situations that can cause intense emotions that can consume a person.
Oh,
And that's the piece that is the difference, right? Between a
interesting.
bother or
Irritation.
an irritation or just like a difficult topic. A
Yes.
trigger is actually something where your response is so emotional or so intense that it consumes you. You
Interesting. Like
you go
obsessive.
red, right?
Ah,
And you can't get past it. You have
yes.
a fight or flight reaction
Yes.
or fight, flight, freeze.
Or fight, fight, fight.
Fight or fight, fight, fight. And that's what is, difference in defining what a trigger is.
Very, very interesting.
And the triggers can come, from some interesting there's a couple
Their
interesting things
origin
that is
stories.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, what are your
Mm-hmm.
histories, your origin stories? Is it fear? Is this
Mm.
trigger because of an instance of fear, and that fear reaction changes how, somebody can react in a certain situation. So, can change how a person thinks and reacts. It can reduce your conscious thought. Again,
Mm.
like your fear
Huge.
is a blocker. It's a
Yes.
blocker for like actual reality of what's going on. Um, Guilt or shame. This one
Ooh.
is me to a
Ooh.
T.
Interesting.
I'm not a person who has a lot of fears.
Okay.
I've been very fortunate, I think, to live a life without a lot of danger.
Sure.
Um, but I'm because of my personality, type A,
Origin
overachiever,
story.
perfectionist origin
Yeah.
story, guilt and shame
Interesting.
are triggering to me. I mean, I always say I could tell you, like, I can literally pinpoint like every disappointment I've ever had of
Oh
myself.
my
Oh yeah, it's so
gosh.
stupid. But so if someone if someone pokes at one of those,
Yes.
triggered,
Right.
right? Flooded. So
Right.
guilt and shame, I think that's like one that people wouldn't like. Fear, that one's an easy one, but
Yes.
guilt and shame. Anger. Anger can be an overwhelming emotion that can lead to a like people just doing things they're really not proud of,
Sure.
right? Anger
Right.
can come out of suppressed emotions, the
Yes.
inability to have been able to carry out like a full
Mhm.
emotional cycle through something, and so they
Right.
have this stored anger, and then that can trigger them, that they can't get out of it. Um, anxiety.
Worries
Anxiety
about the future.
is yeah, so
Yes.
fear is from something that actually happened in the past.
Yeah.
Anxiety is all of the possible things that could happen,
Sure.
and that's a huge trigger. It's like,
Sure.
I mean,
Worry. A worry wart
a
is
worry
gonna
wart,
have a lot of
exactly, that's a good
anxiety.
way of saying
Yeah.
it. And then boundary concern. So this one I also find really fascinating.
Boundary concerns?
Yeah, so, like, if you've had unhealthy boundaries, and I'm gonna
Ah.
go with, burnout and overwhelm
Yeah,
here.
right. We
If
talked about
that's
boundaries, I think, in a previous episode.
absolutely,
Yeah.
if boundaries have been an issue for you,
Yeah.
and it has led to overwhelm and,
Yes.
and I
And
mean
burnout or whatever.
and anything. I mean, boundaries could have resulted in physical aggression. It could have
Sure.
sexual aggression. It could have resulted in if your boundaries are being,
Pounced
uh,
on?
yeah, or yeah,
Or you don't have
past
boundaries?
whatever. If you
Yeah.
don't have them, or
Right.
if they're being challenged, that can be a huge trigger
Sure.
because you've maybe had to create those boundaries because of something that happened in your past, and now something's coming up against them. You could be triggered and flooded
For
with
sure.
emotion and
Well, maybe you have suppressed, like, in boundaries, we talked a lot about, like, how not having boundaries, you get, resentful to people. Maybe that suppression is then projected out, right?
yeah. And
Right.
when you're triggered because your boundary is being challenged,
Or lack
again, you
thereof.
go into a trigger response,
Sure.
which is, again, more than just like, that's a bother, that's annoying. It's like,
Right.
I can't see clearly.
I love the
I'm,
word consumed.
I'm consumed. My
Yes.
reaction is so over the top that it doesn't make sense
Right.
to somebody else, but it probably makes sense to me if I
Yes.
can communicate clearly why I'm
Mm.
acting this way.
Yes.
And that's the part I want to focus on today's chat is how knowing that we have the triggers,
Yes.
right? Like identifying that they exist, and that's
Mhm.
a good exercise. Like,
Mhm.
wow, what are the things that when they happen send me over the top?
Yeah.
So for me, I'm triggered by financial scarcity.
Okay.
That one, it can just like drop me to my knees. I
Sure.
can't talk about it. I can't deal with it. I'm
Yeah.
I'm like powerless.
You
I'm
wanna
flooded. I'm
be like the
overwhelmed.
head in the sand sort of analogy,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But if I can acknowledge
That's what's going
this is
on.
going to trigger me,
Yeah.
or I see this coming, I can more rationally actually address the issue,
Mm.
not from my triggered place, but from like probably a far more productive
And I would say that
headspace.
that's a fear as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
also,
right,
yeah.
right,
And I mean it's just based on oh yeah, whatever, whole
right,
whole history of that's just the thing, right?
right,
Like
right.
so if I know that that's a trigger, how can I get out ahead of the communication process
Mm.
and the inner work, maybe the
Mhm.
spaciousness that I need
Yeah.
in order to move more effortlessly through that trigger, because we are
Right.
not always going to be able to avoid them.
No.
And nor should we, because avoiding them,
Like stuffs them.
it stuffs them,
Yes.
makes them worse.
Yes.
So I think there's the topic that I'm just curious about and love the chance to talk about is like how do we acknowledge them,
Yeah.
communicate them, and move through them
Yeah.
in a way that is really healthy and productive.
I love that you broke them down, and I think we should talk about each one of them broken down. So, I feel like probably triggers is like become a cultural word now. Maybe therapy, thank you, therapy, right? So many of us have,
Yeah, it's good to have a word to place
oh, you're
upon
being triggered.
something.
Oh, I'm being triggered.
And if you think about the real origin of that word, it's basically like the mechanism that you use to pull
Right?
a
A gun.
gun. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're pulling on the trigger, you're gonna get a boom.
Right.
Like
And
it's
it's not
gonna be
necessary.
bad.
Yeah, it's not good. So I love that. I love that it's, but the consuming aspect I didn't understand. So like you said, the going red, right?
Yes.
Somebody goes from sitting 0 conversation, maybe they're a little heated, to 1,000,
Yeah.
and all they see is fire. You see the fire coming out of the ears and the
Yeah.
eyes, right? So maybe a way that you can, this is just me thinking out loud, acknowledge or notice when you're being triggered is, well, first of all, just having more awareness, but that's not always easy for everyone, right? Like, oh, I'm literally raging right now, or inside. Like for me, I'm a more internal processor, so I'll notice the fire burning inside. I can literally feel the fire in my belly.
And someone might not even know. You
Right.
can contain it. They might not see it on your
Right, where
face.
there's a lot of people who are external processors, and it's just
It literally
it's
turns
coming at
bright
whoever's,
red. Yeah.
right, it's coming out, right? And it's unstoppable. So I think that the key for understanding it within your own self is in those emotions that you talked about, getting closer to fear, anxiety, shame, guilt within your own self. And as we've said before, we're not therapists, but I know my own inner work that I have done. When I can understand what's going on, if I'm noticing myself having fire feelings like, oh, somebody just stepped on your ego. That's kind of something that set I in my
It's
head.
one of your triggers.
Yeah.
Triggers.
I feel fire. I'm like, oh, I'm pissed. Oh, I'm pissed. I'm really good at actually managing what I say, but I'm not good at like always labeling it. So I've gotten better at labeling what's going on. Oh, you're pissed. Okay. What's going on here? Why do you feel fire inside? And then if you could break it down through, is this fear? Do you feel shame?
Yes.
Do you feel anxiety? Do you feel, I don't remember what all of them were.
Yep.
And then label it, then you're like, oh, I'm feeling afraid. Why am I feeling afraid? Because I feel devalued, maybe.
Mm.
When your ego
Yeah, with
stepped
your
on,
ego. Yeah.
right? Because that's probably would be mine.
Yeah.
When my ego stepped on because someone challenged maybe my beliefs or ideas or the way I think I should be treated or whatever the thing is. My ego comes up because it's a protection mechanism. But is that healthy and is it helpful? So if I can label it within myself, I feel the fire, I feel the energy coming up. If I could label it like, oh, you're mad. You're mad. Yeah, you're so mad. Ah. And I could sit and like build the anger, build the fire until it's just like, right? There's that too, move the energy that way. But then when I can sit with it and be like, what was underneath the fire? My feelings were hurt. I felt devalued. That's the vulnerability with even just myself
Mhm.
that then allows to more awareness so that I have choices to not react that way. Do you think? I mean, how's that feel
Yeah.
for
I
you?
mean, I think that's like a good walkthrough of kind of the overall process that we're hoping people
Yes.
can and think about for themselves. And I should caveat that if you have already identified that you have some pretty severe triggers,
Mhm.
working with a therapist is always a good idea
Yes.
because they are going to be able to help you walk through these phases
Yes.
side by side.
Yes.
So there are absolutely life experiences that could be triggering to the point that you're gonna struggle to get there alone in
Mhm.
this process. Um, but that said, if you, are a person who's interested in doing some self-reflection and inner work, or maybe has already done
Mhm.
some therapy and you find this topic interesting, I think exactly that process that you walked through makes sense. So, number 1, just, like, identify. Sit with yourself through a period of time and be like, "Huh," and we keep coming back to this word curiosity. We use this
Yes.
in the episode about spaciousness, but, "Huh, why did I get so defensive in that
Right.
conversation? Like, clearly it wasn't meant to be an attack on me, but I took it that way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because we have to assume
Why?
our loved ones do not mean to harm us.
Yeah, you
Very
talked about
rarely.
intention. Like,
Right.
most people don't have bad intention.
No.
Like,
But we assume they do. We
we
got our
do.
dukes up all the time
Dukes
about
up.
specific things.
Yeah. So if then that particular situation just really lit me on fire, made me see red or brought tears, again, looking through. So a naming. Okay, these are the things. These are the times when I felt triggered. Okay, next step, take one of those. Go to that list. What was underneath it?
Yes.
Was it fear? Was it anxiety? Was it anger? What was underneath it? Because that, again, that's the root cause that
Yeah,
we
it
need
gives
to
you a
really
label
address.
too. Yeah, it gives you a label other than just
Yeah.
I'm pissed or
And
I'm
then making a
whatever.
decision ultimately, do I want to decrease myself in how I'm triggered by that topic?
Right.
Can I go there? Can I do that work? And do I
Right.
need help in doing that, right? Like processing. Um or how can I, knowing that maybe I'm in process of that work, or I'm, wherever I'm at in that trajectory, let the people around me know that
Mm.
this topic is going to be difficult.
Yes.
Because most people, again, with their intention is not to harm,
Right.
but they might go to a topic that is gonna set you off,
And
whether
they
they
don't
realize
know.
it or not.
Then you just seem like a firecracker going off without even lighting a
Yeah,
fuse.
and at the end of the day, let's think about this podcast. We have before had a warning to our guests before listening, a trigger warning,
Yes.
where we literally say, like, "We're gonna cover sensitive topics in this podcast, so be aware that they might trigger you." And so then you can choose to listen or
Or
not
not
listen,
listen.
or
Hmm.
listen when you're ready. That's become a huge thing actually in the podcast world, or I
Yes.
mean, in media, it's like trigger warning.
Yeah, well, you see it on movies. Hey, this
Yeah,
is rated whatever.
yeah,
So
for a
if you've got
reason.
small children, might not want to watch this with them because it's rated R and there's sexual content and violence or whatever, right? So it's a
Yeah.
warning. So talking about that, to me, when you have a conversation with your close loved ones about like I'm working through this, you could say, I recognize I have a wound around this because that's
It's
really
a wound,
it's a wound
an
at a
open
core
wound.
thing.
Mhm.
Like, is it a wound in the process of healing because I'm working on it? Is it a wound? Now it's a scar,
Oh, yeah. I like
right?
this. Yeah, it's there. I'm
Right.
better,
I
but
see. We can all see it, or maybe we can't see it because it's under my clothing. But I have a
we
scar
always
now,
have scars.
right?
Yeah.
And I felt the 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 kind of like of the scar. You know how you can have a scar. You have scars. I have scars.
Yeah.
You can feel kind of like the pull on
There's an
that.
energy there.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. So you could talk about it in that way potentially when
Yeah.
you're talking about with your loved ones. Like, let's say you're going to get help or you're doing your own inner work, right? Because I love that you want to bring it to the reality of how can people utilize this.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's say you're like, okay, I'm working on this, however you choose to work on it, with a therapist, with a life coach, with your own self,
Or spiritual advisor.
right?
Yeah.
Whatever the thing is. And you don't want to avoid it, right? Because when we take stuff to the lab of life, the real like beaker freaking thing where we're experimenting, we need to experiment. But you need it to be a safer environment. So you could have the conversation of, I have a wound about this. You can share where your origin story came from. My wound came from when I was young and blah, blah, blah. And people told me I wasn't worthy, whatever the thing is, right? Like, or people totally dismissed me and I felt dismissed. And I don't do well with being dismissed. As you know, I've shared stories. And so while I'm working through this and while I'm learning new tools, I may take pauses. You might notice I have an emotional trigger response, which can look this way. And if that happens, I'm working hard at managing it or doing my own inner work, but I ask for graciousness.
Okay. So I'm thinking about this in two contexts that I'm like, that you've flipped a switch for me.
Okay.
One, you're starting a new relationship. You're dating someone.
Yes.
Obviously, maybe it don't lead in
You're
on a
the
first or
first date.
second
I have
date.
all these
But
wounds. They're going to be like,
so I'm
bye.
not saying lead with that. However, at some point in cultivating and growing a relationship, this is going to be an important thing to surface earlier rather than later because that's where your communication is going to
Yes.
improve. They're not gonna be confused about a reaction that you have because they don't understand why this is triggering you.
You're
And I
right.
think a lot of misunderstanding and relationship fracture comes because people are not being clear or upfront about their triggers. Okay,
Right.
that's example number 1.
Right.
But the one that I'm like, actually, that one's maybe a little bit more obvious,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm thinking about hiring in the workplace.
Mm.
Now, you hire somebody. I'm a boss, right? I
Yes.
have a team,
Yes.
and we're so unable to actually ask the questions we need to
That's
ask
a
a
very good
person in an
point.
interview,
Yes.
that will really tell us how they're going to respond in our environment. So,
Right.
there's many ways to get around that, and companies have different personality testing or whatever, and like that's super helpful. Um, but with an employee, an excellent exercise is really just to be honest with them and say, like, are there things I should know about that just trigger you? And maybe it's like,
Mm.
I don't take feedback well. Okay, well, knowing that, I can say, how would you take feedback well? Well,
Mm.
I prefer it written, or I prefer it in person,
Mm-hmm.
or like rather than give them feedback negatively and then that
Mm-hmm.
impacts them bad and
Mm-hmm.
me bad,
Mm-hmm.
why wouldn't I want to understand how they would take it better?
Yeah.
Or like I mean just we have a good in my business, like we will ask the question, how do you feel about ladders and going on ladders and heights? Because that could be something you have
Oh,
to
for
do. And if
sure.
they say, I'm triggered by a fear of heights,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna put you up a ladder.
Right.
But you wanna know how many people don't answer that question honestly?
Interesting. And you
Yeah.
find out later
As they're shaking like a leaf on a ladder, and I'm like,
you have a fear of
Get
ladders."
down."
Yeah.
It does not behoove me as the employer to put somebody in a triggered situation.
So, okay, this leads me to like, let's just back up a second. What if they are not aware that they're afraid of a ladder?
They may not know. Totally
So,
f
what
totally
if
f
you are not
totally
aware
fair.
that
Yeah.
you have this trigger?
Yeah, it might be new news.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think that the actual emotional trigger is a really good key to you. It's a clue in the puzzle of you
Mm.
to dig deeper in an area.
Yes.
So even just backing up of what's going on underneath of it, like maybe if you noticing yourself in interactions with people being more fiery, feeling that fire energy, or actually just like people are saying like you don't take like criticism very well, or you like kind of are projecting out on me, or you're a projector, or whatever the feedback may potentially be, or you're just aware that you're just like whatever the thing is. Maybe that's a clue, like, that's where your inner work needs to go, right?
Yeah,
Because some people, to your point, they're maybe not lying because maybe they're not
for
aware.
sure. Yeah, they may not be aware. However, if you are aware,
Don't
we
lie.
need a process by which to be able to communicate this without judgment.
Mm,
Because what has happened to you, it in the past doesn't have to indicate your future. But if I don't know, I I might put you in a triggering situation,
yes,
which is not going to lead to your best work,
right,
and nobody wins in that
right.
situation. But that also made me think about like I'm just like really on this leadership thing. Like
Mm,
leading people
mhm.
is about understanding how to put people in their best like positions
Yes,
and those positions where they thrive
yes.
because maybe I mean they're not going to trigger. How and the other piece of that that just made me think about is that we've really been focusing on this conversation. I'm aware of the fight response. Like we laugh
Mm,
about it, right? Fight,
mhm.
fight, fight. But there's
Oh, yes,
multiple responses.
yes.
Fight,
Light,
flight,
freeze.
freeze, fawn. Like freeze and fawn are kind of the same thing, but you might see in an employee that something happens and
They shut down.
they shut down.
Yeah,
They won't talk,
they
they
detach.
detach, they're not, and you're like, "What's really going on here?" Well, maybe they've been triggered, but they didn't have, like, an intense outward emotional
Right.
response, but something
Well,
happened.
they're having a
They're
failure to function.
they're freezing,
Yes, they're having a failure to
or
function.
they're running or they're
Yes,
freezing.
yes.
So these are two harder ones to detect.
Yes, and I feel like in a lot of us do that. Like we'll have a really stressful situation and we just veg out on TV or we ignore it, we stuff it down, we don't deal with it. That's the same, right? All
Yeah.
of that, right? We maybe at our jobs don't do our best work because we can't deal with the things, that maybe you're triggered by your employer
Hmm.
uh, um, by something they said, they
That
diminished
they don't
you.
even
They
necessarily
don't even know. They're not
know,
aware.
right? They're
Right.
not aware.
Right.
Yeah.
Because everyone's so hyper focused on their own
Yeah.
selves. How could they constantly be in a room and be thinking about everyone else and managing their own
Yeah.
emotions? That's so much energy.
And again, let me be clear. I'm not saying that your employer-employee relationship would be, here's all the things that annoy me. No,
Right.
no, 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 no.
Right.
These are like, based on my life experience, these are situations that might send me over the edge
Right.
to an emotionally flooded space, and I'll have a reaction, fight, flight, freeze, whatever. And again, everybody there's limitations on what one should and could, should share personally, whatever. But it's helpful information, right? Like
Mhm.
it's helpful information for everybody involved, whether it's an employer in
Even as a
relationship,
parent.
a parent relationship,
Right.
a new relationship, an old relationship, whatever the combination of two people are, it's better to communicate when something might approach a trigger warning
Yes.
than it is to just let it happen knowing that it could happen and then have to clean up the mess. That's
Right.
what I'm kind of trying to say.
Yes.
And it's occurring to me how we avoid it. We avoid wanting to know what people's weaknesses are. I mean, that's a way of asking the question, but like it doesn't really
Mm.
get at like
That's actually a
what
really
some
good point.
yeah,
So maybe that's why people hide or flee, whatever,
they're
or
afraid.
they fight because they don't want you to see their weakness,
Well,
their
and why might
vulnerability,
they
their
why might
wound.
they lie about whether they want to go on a ladder or not?
Right.
They're afraid of judgment. And what
Right.
I'm asking them in that question is like, I need you to be honest about this because it impacts whether I will ask you to do that or not. It doesn't mean you're not going to get the job.
And maybe that is actually the thing that you can say to reassure them.
Yes.
It's not that this is not a qualifier for you to do this job.
It's
This
just
is a
something we need to know.
qualifier so that I can know how I can best use
Yeah.
you and the skill sets that you're comfortable sharing in the workforce.
And it just goes to, again, like in any relationship, both for yourself, you can be self aware of how to communicate your needs, but also as a leader
Yes.
or as another person in a relationship, you can have the right questions to ask.
Right.
And like, hey, what would be really triggering to you if I did it?
Right.
Maybe it's related to abandonment. Well, like, it'd be really triggering to me, if you did not call me for 24 hours
Right.
because I have a past abandonment issue. Or
Right.
it would be really triggering to me if you I'm trying to think of another good example. Um, you know, spoke to me in a certain way
Right.
because I have a history of maybe verbal abuse or something like that.
Right.
So it's like that's a really good initial conversation in a relationship building so that we can be aware of what these things are and why they exist and just conscious of it in interacting with somebody that we're growing a relationship with.
Right. Or that we are in a relationship with, because at any point in time, I feel like this is
Yes.
really important. We can shift the energy between by shifting the energy within.
And new triggers might arise.
Absolutely. Right.
Something new might happen that then creates that situation that is sensitive or hurts to the touch like a wound.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, I mean, at any point in time when you have awareness about something, then you have options. It's what you decide to do with it.
And as women, we are especially prone to not share our triggers
Mm.
or to stuff them and hide them and avoid them because we don't want because of shame and guilt
Yes.
and
We don't want to be judged.
we don't want to be judged and we want to appear to have it all together and
Yes.
put up this perception of like perfection.
Social
Well,
media is like the ugh. the thing,
And
right?
also the
Oh,
most triggering thing, right? Like,
oh,
who hasn't been triggered by a social media post,
jeepers.
across so many different things? But, yeah, so we hide behind, like, not wanting to share what they are, but
I think you hit on,
talking out
yes.
loud about them makes it all better.
And I do feel like you hit on something really key is that we do not allow people to see our weaknesses. So maybe this emotional trigger comes from us hiding parts of ourselves that we don't want people to see, our vulnerabilities, our wounds, right?
Mhm.
So we trigger outward. I don't want you to see that I don't like being feeling dismissed. Because then when I let people see that I don't like feeling dismissed, maybe that gives you ammunition,
It's a power struggle.
right?
Okay, so let's go a different direction with this. So you have a trigger, a life experience, and a wound, an open wound, or maybe a wound that's in various states of healing, right? And part of that healing is often like putting yourself back in the like in a situation to
Oh,
address it and like heal it even further.
yes.
And again, that is a painful process
Yes.
because it's like opening the wound back up,
Yes.
right? Like that
Right.
thing's been healing and now you got to open it back up because
Right.
you got to get in there and look around. But the benefit of that, and I just encouraging people again to go
To do the work.
to do the work, to
Mhm.
pursue the avenues of reopening the wound and looking around
Mhm.
for better healing so that you have less of a scar, so that
Right.
you are, less traumatized by the outcome in the future. It's so valuable to do that work, even if it hurts more, even if it
Right.
triggers you more, because the other side of that trigger is probably an absolute unbelievable awareness and
And
joy.
freedom.
And freedom. We've talked a lot about freedom
Yes.
in the course of this podcast. The freedom on the other side of healing that wound
Yes.
is, unlike anything that you could
I
experience.
I read something and I've quoted this quite a bit lately because it might be where I'm at, but I feel like it's where a lot of us are at is why do we have something in our lives and we feel like we've conquered it? Like, okay, going back to the wound analogy. I cut myself, I had a surgery on my arm, just speaking about you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you had surgery on your arm and I had a wound and it's healed or it's in healing. I conquered this. This is done. Then all of a sudden, you're coming back to it. And you're like, why am I dealing with this thing again? We could even talk about it with patterns. Like, I dealt with my abandonment wound. I dealt with it. I healed it. I did a lot of work around it. Why is this resurfacing? And what I read was super fascinating to me is that healing isn't just this straight line, it is a
Mm-mm.
circle.
A circle.
You're going to constantly come back to it, and it's going to probably annoy you. But with healing, when you come back to it in the circle, it is an opportunity for you to assess. No, look at it. It's actually still healed. And now I have new tools. I have new ways of being. I have new understanding and awareness. So while this may trigger the same sort of response from me, now I have new understanding and awareness and tools to deal with it so I can assess how far I have come. I am not that
Yeah.
5-year-old. I am not that 20-year-old. I am not that person. I mean, I am, but I'm not in that same position where that, oh my God, they're saying and doing the thing, you know?
Circle.
Mhm.
Healing is a
It's a
circle.
circle, and it's a time for us when find ourselves in a similar situation where maybe we're emotionally triggered to the point where we go red, to take a pause and be like, wait a minute, I'm triggered about something because I have a really good friend who's a therapist and she says like 90% of what we do is from the age 5 and under.
Yeah,
What?
for
Right?
sure. Yeah.
Our operating system is from 9 and under. Upgrade people, just saying go to therapy and upgrade your system, your operating system,
Upgrade your operating system.
but that's a sidebar. That said, like we come back to it as so we can measure our success, measure and use these new tools to be like move through the cycle quicker.
Yeah. Okay, I want to tell a story here
Okay.
that is perfect tie into this, and
Okay.
it has to do with my arm injury, my
Ah,
wound,
yeah, that I keep referring to.
my big
Sorry.
old scar.
Yeah, I'm just calling you out.
No, I mean I have an obvious scar, so it's a good one, and
And
it's a
when I
good
met
story.
you,
I was
you had
literally
in a
healing
sling.
from it.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
So
yep.
so this is like relevant.
So I broke my arm in a skiing um accident isn't quite the right word. Debacle. Let's call it a skiing debacle
We've all been in those
involving
situations where poles and
it was the tip top of a glacier in
oh,
Canada, and I was going on a
ooh,
tow bar because I wanted to see what was on the other side. I
ooh.
always laugh about that. Oh, I want to see what's on the other side of the mountain. Can't help myself. Okay, I'm willing to go this
Life and limb.
next step. Yeah. Well, long story short, knocked my husband over. He falls on my arm, crack, broken arm. Now, right away, and it was funny because I love skiing, and I
Mm,
was like, in my head, and going through the motions of healing from this, I'm like, I can't have this ruin skiing for me. That
right.
would be so sad.
An emotional trigger.
That would be like
Yeah.
really
I
sad
get on a ski
if
hill and I'm
this.
like,
Yeah, I was afraid of that. I was
right.
like, what if I can't get back on skis? What if it's so painful that I had to go through this that I can't get back on skis? So I decided, I was like, no, I'm not letting that happen. I can't let that happen. So we planned a ski trip for a year later when I was healed and I could get back
Jeez.
out.
Bold,
And
by the way, Mariah.
well, I was intent. I was like, not letting this stop me. I don't want to model to my children that I'm going to let this stop me. I want to show that like we can power through this. But I said, the one thing I am not going to do on this mountain is go in tow bar.
Mm,
I'm not doing it. And
yeah,
they're pretty rare. So like I was pretty sure that wasn't even going to be an
sure.
issue. Well, there we were skiing. And we somehow found ourselves in a situation where the only way to go from one place to the next was
No.
a tow bar. Yeah. I,
Life
I was
life was trying to teach you something
oh yeah.
there.
I was like, "Uh-huh, you're back on skis." Well, that's not good enough. You need to conquer your fear of a tow bar.
Oh, wow.
So, I was with my children and they knew. They were like, "Oh no,
Here's
mom
the
is
tow
gonna
bar. Oh,
struggle
yeah.
here.
Right.
What are we gonna do?" And I'm in that moment, like freezing,
Yes.
fighting, like I was, wanting to panic and lose it. And then I'm like, no, I got this. Like, I have to get past this today. It's obvious the universe has put this in front of me because there's no way out. It's just
And also this was unplanned.
I
Yes.
didn't even realize it was there. And so I used it as an opportunity to learn a better way to go on that thing and pull myself, get pulled across. And uh the feeling at the end of that, it was a pretty short ride, but like
Like 5 seconds later,
I
I
was
felt
like, "Oh
elated.
my god." And my husband hadn't been with us, but he rejoined us shortly after that, and we were all 3 sitting there like, "You won't believe what just happened. Mom had to go on the tow bar." But I did it, and then I
You
was like,
did.
I'm healed. I feel better."
Yes.
And then, the end of that story is actually, I'd still had residual pain for quite a while, and this is gonna be very woo-woo, but we're going there. And I finally went back to the scene of
The
where it
scene of the
happened,
crime.
which again, like could be very triggering of
Oh,
like this
for
traumatic
sure.
moment happened
Yes.
in this place. And I was like, not gonna, I loved this mountain. I Whistler in Canada and Blackwell Mountain. Like I didn't want to not want to be there, right?
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I have to get past this. One, I still need to see what's on the other side, but I need to find a better way to get there,
Yes.
not tow bar related. So, first off, find a better path, found it, got to the top, saw it on the other side. Guess what? Just some more mountains, but
Mm, but still beautiful,
I
I'm sure.
I was thrilled that it happened.
Yes.
And then in being there, and it was actually I've told people in the before about this, like it was actually the closest I've ever felt to spirit.
Mm,
There was something about being up there in the sun, top of this
same
mountain
spot.
on skis, and I put my arms out wide and I skied down
Aw.
and I had music playing in my headphones and I was like healed. Like I'm healed physically,
Wow.
spiritually, emotionally. It was epic. And I'm
Wow.
so humbled and grateful that I got to work through those
Yes.
issues because it made me a better person for so many reasons.
Yes.
And so getting to the other side of that trauma, which I fully admit is like pretty minor in terms of things people
Yeah,
could go
but
through.
breaking bones, I mean, that's
But
never fun.
it was an experience. That passing to that other side of it was actually a spiritual experience.
Wow.
And I would for always like want to go back to that moment. And now
Wow.
I try to get back there once a year or whenever we can, because I'm like, I want to go up there and be in that energy again because
Yes.
it is so healing and powerful. So
So it
I
is,
just made me think of
it's a
that story.
circle.
It's still circling. It's
Yes.
still circling. And every time I go back, I revisit the memory. I think about the positives instead of the negatives and to reframe that experience
So
and
in that moment, you had a choice.
yeah,
You had a choice to avoid it,
never ski again.
right? Flee, fawn, whatever, fight. You
Yeah.
could fight your family. I'm not doing it. We're not going to Whistler.
Yeah,
We'll go to
right. I
any
could have
other
thrown a
mountain.
fit when we saw that tow bar and put my kids in a
Right.
situation of like, well, how are we getting mom out of here?
But
Right.
you chose to intentionally heal and
Yeah.
work through the cycle of healing, and you made the mountain your bitch.
Yeah. My bestie.
And now the mountain has given you its medicine, I would say.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. So it's just my story. It's just one story. Everybody,
Yes.
I think what I love is hearing people's stories, right? Of
Yes.
where they're at in this progress towards healing on the circle.
Yes.
And then how can we help them in that process through just listening to something like this where they're inspired by, oh, I can relate to that. I can relate to
Mhm.
having to confront the fear, move through it, revisit it again and again. Like, why
Mhm.
is this happening to me again? Right? Well,
Mhm.
there's something more to learn. And so I hope anybody listening is just able to take away from it, like, uh, visualize themselves in these stories and in this conversation and think, what could I do to better heal from my trigger, communicate them with
Yes.
other people, and just be more aware that it exists.
Yes.
If you do any of those
Yes.
things, you're gonna feel the you're gonna feel a tangible emotional improvement.
Well, we all know people. Yes. Thank you for summarizing it that way. I would say we all know people who are triggered a lot, right? There's a lot of people out there who just react, react, react. So if you do find yourself in that situation, that I just want to remind people that is like a puzzle piece for you. It's not like, well, this is just how I am. You can choose to accept it and continually be that way your entire life. But if you can elicit curiosity about yourself, like, well, does it have to be this way? Could I be different? Is this trying to show me? What is life trying to teach me? In your situation, you used it as a teachable moment, not only for your kids, but also for yourself and a healing moment.
Yeah.
But is this trying to teach me something? Is my emotional trigger, whatever response is going on within me, whether it's within me or outside of me, something that I need to look at? So, I mean, just coming back to emotional triggers and why they exist, I think they're really puzzle pieces for our own
Yeah.
complex puzzle of ourselves.
Yes. That's a good way to look at it. We are, if nothing but a really like a 5,000 piece puzzle here.
Oh, jeez. I think I
One
might be 10.
million
Yeah.
piece puzzle.
Yeah,
and
well, millions
more
probably
pieces
accurate.
that you have, the harder it is to put them
Yes.
all together.
Right.
So, but that also is what makes people interesting and fascinating and intensely human. And what I love about, I mean, just the human experience.
So true.
Well, with that, I think that's a great place to end on today's
Yes.
conversation about triggers. And I hope that anybody listening is inspired to look at this within themselves. And if you like to share, you can always find us on our Instagram page and
YouTube too now.
and on YouTube. Yep,
Yep.
you can watch the recordings on YouTube and share with us like how this might have
Yeah.
helped you.
Are you triggered?
What triggers you?
Yes. We'd
Let's
love
talk
to
about
hear
it.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Cheers, friends. You've just finished another episode of the Heart and Soul podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the show. And if you've loved it, we would love if you'd leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening. You can find links to leave that review in the show notes, where you'll also find other resources that we reference on our show. And if you think a friend could find value in today's episode or any future episodes, please share this episode with them on social media. This is one of the only ways the podcast can organically grow, and we just can't wait to connect with you and all of your besties. You can also find Monique and I on our many social media platforms or our websites, and we're going to leave links to those in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing our hearts and souls with you again next time. With Heart, I'm Mariah.
And with Soul, I'm Monique.